Good evening and welcome to Quincy Access Television's Election Night 2022 coverage of the Massachusetts state primary election. I'm Joe Catalano, joined here at the anchor desk by my colleague, as always, Mark Crosby.
It's a pleasure.
As always, Mark, good to see you this election night. We've got a great lineup of guests this evening.
We do, and we were out at the polls, at least I was, earlier in the day, so we do have an interview with City Clerk Nicole Crispo.
But we begin it all with our interview with Quincy Mayor Thomas Koch. Our Election Night 2022 state primary coverage continues here on Quincy Access Television. We'd like to add local flavor, and there's no better way to do that than to bring in the Chief Executive Officer for the City of Quincy. Mayor Thomas Koch is joining us in studio this evening. Mr. Mayor, great to see you.
Great to see you, Joe. Started my day with you, and I'm going to finish my day with you.
We get you coming and going.
I'm jealous.
Have you been out to the polls?
Actually, I was in Squantum for a while today, around 1:30. Kim Driscoll was there for a bit. She called me, asked if I'd join her, and of course, Representative Ayers was there, and Commissioner Hanley was there, and Treasurer Bellotti was there, and it was a who's who out in Squantum.
Wow.
I believe they had about 350 had voted at that point. Squantum, as you know, is a good voting precinct.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Very much so.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the different ways there are for folks to vote? You have early voting, you have mail-in voting, and then, of course, voting on Election Day.
Yeah, well, it remains to be seen how this is going to play out in a sense. I mean, a lot of the folks that have argued for this believe it'll increase turnout. You know, that's the question, right? A lot of people that I've spoken to that did the mail-in vote would normally go out and vote today, but it's just more convenient. Mailed in and get it over with. So I'm not so sure it's going to do what they suggested it would do to bring out additional folks. I mean, I get frustrated from time to time when I see the turnouts getting less and less, particularly municipal elections. The flip side is that you're right. You know, it's a great privilege to be able to vote, but you don't have to vote. So, you know, and then you start to think about, okay, if everybody came out, are they all educated on the issues? Should they be in a position where they're voting if they're not paying attention to the issues of the candidates? So it remains to be seen. I'm all for making voting convenient, but I also think this comes with citizenships and responsibility. And I think being able to vote and the many options that we have, there's no excuse not to vote, you know.
You mentioned Kim Driscoll. I know you have endorsed her as well as Maura Healey. Why?
Kim I worked with. She was the mayor of Salem. So when I went in, she was one of the folks. She was in a little ahead of me. So, you know, I talked to her periodically about some advice, and we just hit it off. She's a very successful mayor. She's done a great job with the city of Salem. She's well liked up there. I do like the idea of having a mayor in the lieutenant governor role with a potential governor who served in state office but has never served the municipal side. So I think the Maura Healey, Kim Driscoll team would be phenomenal for cities and towns, because I think you'd have a good understanding, but they would have a good understanding what happens at the local level. I think the Baker-Polito has become the model now going forward. I think they were so great as a team. We didn't always see that. I remember Tommy O'Neill under Ed King. They didn't get along at all. It didn't always work that way. So I think Kim and Maura would have worked very well together, and the more they would succeed, I think the better for local government.
And many successes with the Baker-Polito administration for the city of Quincy.
Indeed. I mean, it's been a great partnership, and I'm going to miss them, though I'm looking forward to work with. I think Maura's the next governor. I don't want to be cocky about it, but I think it's hers to lose. And I think Kim Driscoll's in a good place. I think she's polling well, and I could tell by her opposition's ads of recent, he's gone negative, therefore that's usually a good sign. You know, but I got to be honest, I will miss dealing and working with Charlie Baker and Karen Polito. They were always responsive. They were always up front, no matter what the issue, get back to you. I can't say the same for his predecessor.
Curious that the governor didn't endorse anybody to be his predecessor. What do you make of that, Mayor?
I think there's a couple things there. One is, you know, he's one of the most popular governors in the country. He's still polling very well, even with folks beating him up on the T and other issues. So I think there's a level there of a little bit above it, and I don't blame him. I think I'd stay out of it too at this point. I'm not so sure his party was going to make it easy for him to get through the conventions, and I think that's become a problem in politics. I think the extremes on both parties are running the operations now, and it's not a healthy thing. I think you have to govern from the middle. Sometimes it leans right, sometimes it leans left, but the two extremes, I think, have made it more difficult. And I think in Massachusetts, that's why you've seen unenrolled go up dramatically. They're even fleeing both parties by the droves. And I think there's a message there, and they don't seem to get it, both sides.
I think the two extremes, I think it's tough for a child going through, let's say, public school, or at least that age, to really get a great understanding when there's so polar opposites right now to both parties.
I spoke the other day to the incoming teachers, and I told them a story. I said, when I was in high school, it was Reagan running against Carter for president. And I had Bernice Maid of political science. And we were doing a debate. The class was at Long Island Hospital for the patients. So I raised my hand. I wanted to be Reagan. She assigned me Carter. The kid that wanted Carter, she assigned Reagan. And it was a great teaching moment to me that you got to learn both sides. You got to understand the issues in all ways. And I think we've lost that in the schools. And that was my message to the teachers. You shouldn't be bringing your opinion in the classroom. It's about critical learning, and these kids got to learn how to look at the issues and learn both sides. And I think we've gotten away from that starting in high schools, and I think it's the worst case at the college today. You think about the Reagan-Carter election. The great debates were on the campuses of the colleges back then. Now if somebody comes in you disagree with, they boo them off the campus. It's, I don't know, we got to wake up in this country.
Mayor, always good to talk to you, always enlightening, and I miss Bernice very much. She was a wonderful lady. Yeah,
Yes,
she really was. Thanks for spending some time with us this evening.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome.
Well, as my colleague had mentioned, the interview with Mayor Thomas Koch, and I had alluded to an interview with City Clerk Nicole Crispo. So we have that for you right now. So, Nikki, what can you say about primary day here in the city?
Well, we have 31 precincts open. We opened at 7 a.m. and we'll be open till 8 p.m. for residents to come out and vote in person.
And I know that the rain waited for voting day, so talk about that and maybe your expectations with voter turnout.
Yeah, so I predicted about 25%. We are on track right now at about 15%. That's including the mail-in ballots and the in-person early ballots. So, you know, I have to say we still have 4 hours left, so I could say we'd get up to 20%, hopefully.
And I mean, traditionally, is it busier closer to, or should I say, after work as opposed to before work?
Of course. So we do have that rush in the morning, and then we have a little bit of a lull, and then we will have that after work rush that comes in, or after dinner.
And I guess just historically looking at primaries, state primaries, is this typical of a state primary as far as voter turnout?
It certainly is. It's typical. We've been at 18, anywhere from 15 to 28%. So yeah, it's typical. And like I said, we're open, we're here. We encourage people to come out till 8 p.m.
And any confusion on where to vote? I know there was redistricting that was involved in this election, correct?
There was redistricting. We did, however, send out a postcard to all households that have voters, letting them know if they had a change of polling place or if they stayed the same. So everybody got notified. You can certainly go on to the City of Quincy website. We have a Where Do I Vote link, as well as Secretary of State.
And just talk about the results. Central tabulation is enforced during this election?
Yes, it is. Central tabulation has been completed. So if you wish to use your early voting ballot, you need to either return it to City Hall before 8 p.m., okay, or you can go to the polls and get a ballot.
And talk about early voting, and actually, before we leave central tabulation, talk about the results and how they will be tabulated.
So we do have the workings of the central tabulation already done. So that is all on a thumb drive. That gets added to the individual precinct counts at the end of the night and tallied together. And there'll be an unofficial results, probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock.
And why are they unofficial?
So there's provisional ballots that need to be counted, which is if you go to the polls and you believe you're a registered voter, but your name isn't on the voting list, we let you vote provisionally, and then we decide with the Board of Registrars hearing whether that person is a registered voter. If you went to the RMV and registered to vote there, change your address, change your party, all of those things come through our state system and get loaded into our city system for election day. So, there are a couple of different components to it. There is human error, of course, but we try to give everybody every opportunity. Once you're out at the polling place, you should not get denied a ballot.
And talk about early voting and mail-in voting.
So they're both over for now, and they'll be back for November very soon. You can still always put in your application from here until the last week in October in order to get your ballot for November. And as soon as we get them from the state, we'll mail them right out. We do have about 8,000 requests right now, and we anticipate some more.
And absentee ballots, what's the timeline on receiving those?
Absentee ballots, for this one, it was a little different where we had the holiday yesterday. It was Friday at 5 p.m., but for November, it will be the day before the election at noon. And all the permanent absentee voters have already got their application, and they can anticipate them going out just the same as the early voting ballots as soon as we get them.
So I guess lastly, if a person isn't registered to vote, maybe talk about how they could and what the deadline is, and then also the deadline for absentee requests.
Yeah, so the voter registration, we have it from 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday in our office. You can go online and register to vote under the Secretary of State's office. We also provide a link there on our city website at quincyma.gov. And there's applications for early voting, and there's applications for absentee voting. Both available right on the website. Can't be any easier. Or you can certainly call our office at 617-376-1144.
Very good. I want to thank you for taking the time out at about 4 o'clock on voting day to chat with us. So we'll let you go back to your duties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us for our Election Night 2022 primary coverage here on Quincy Access Television. Joe Catalano with my colleague Mark Crosby, and our coverage continues, Mark, with our next guest.
Indeed. Our next guest is current Senator John Keenan, representing the Norfolk and Plymouth District. He is up for re-election and is joining us, as you had said, right about now. So, Senator Keenan, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure, as always, John. Thanks for taking up the invitation to come over and participate in our coverage. We like to let folks know particularly what's going on here in the city of Quincy, although it's a statewide primary. You, of course, represent Quincy, among other districts. How is it out at the polls today?
Wet.
Yes.
Quite wet. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the numbers show in terms of turnout, because I got the sense clearly that the turnout wasn't all that high. It didn't seem to be as busy as what it might have been on a sunny day. And that's what I saw not only in Quincy, but I was down in the other parts of my district, down in Abington, Rockland, and in Hanover, which would be part of the Norfolk and Plymouth district in January. That's part of the district now for terms of election. And it was relatively quiet down there. At the end of the school day, it seemed to pick up a little bit. I was in Hanover at that point. It seemed to be a little bit busier, but in general, it was slow.
There's so many ways to vote now in Massachusetts. I mean, you have early voting, you have mail-in voting, which is, I suppose, a version of early voting. So I wonder if folks are just not coming to the polls because of that.
Yeah, that's his point. I think that's a factor as well. So you take the number of people who voted early, you take the weather today, and the combination of the two might make it appear as though it's a lower turnout, and I think it ultimately will show that. You know, it's interesting at some of the polling places in Quincy, if you weren't going to vote at that location, you really wouldn't know there was an election because there were no sign holders outside. At the Marymount School, for instance, there were no sign holders, and there was nobody outside at all. So unless you were going there to vote, you really wouldn't know that it was a polling place.
Brings up a good question, I guess. Do you think the state does a good job of promoting elections?
I think it does a good job. I think we could do a better job.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of parties that have to play a role in that, and I think the press has to play a role as well. And that's why, you know, I was tout local access TV because you really do a good job of getting word out at the local level. But I think the bigger press outlets, the local networks, have to do a better job of letting people know that there are elections. You give candidates the opportunity to do those 5-minute segments, and I think it would be great if, you know, ABC, NBC, CBS, NECN, all of them did the same thing. I think that would be really good for our democracy and would increase knowledge and awareness of the election.
One of the, I suppose, one of the issues in Massachusetts is healthcare costs. I know it's been about a decade since a commission was formed. Has that made a difference?
A commission in the Commonwealth?
Health,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah, so
Health Policy Commission.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so that commission, it definitely does. It has played a pretty active role in assessing legislative proposals and what its impact will be, and then also making some recommendations. So I think it's had a pretty significant impact, but we still have a lot to do in terms of providing affordable health care. I know I filed legislation this session that would do a few things, but one, it would allow an analysis of the cost of health care from the perspective of the consumer as opposed to the healthcare providers. And then it would also provide that there'd be no copays on certain medications, for instance, for diabetes and for certain heart conditions and things like that, because that would encourage people to take their medications, and rather than have to make that decision between can I afford it or not afford it, can I skip a day or 2 days, maybe it won't have an impact, and oftentimes people end up on our emergency departments. So I think it has had an impact, not only in recommending policy, but then we have CHIA, which looks at the cost of the proposals, the various legislative proposals.
I've been asking folks this evening, John, how do they feel about the prospect of having a Democratic governor back in the corner office on Beacon Hill?
I guess I'm fine with it. I get excited about it. You know, it appears as though on the primary, certainly Maura
Right.
Healey will win, even though Sonia Chang Diaz's name is still on the ballot. Looks like Maura Healey will win. I've dealt with Attorney General Healey in a lot of different areas, particularly in the opioid work, and then on the vaping legislation that we had, and then also relative to a sheriff situation down in Bristol County. And she's always just been top-notch to deal with. Very pragmatic, very practical, very reasoned, and she knows what she's doing. And so the prospect of her, regardless of party affiliation, being governor, I'm really excited about. But you know, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the main thing is that we manage to work together. That's what's important. And it does look like we will have certainly Maura Healey as the Democratic standard bearer going into the final election.
Right, right.
I know you and I spoke on a previous program about clean energy legislation, pretty big here in Massachusetts.
It is, and it is so critically important when you look at what we've experienced recently with the drought here. You look at the situation out on the West Coast right now with the drought situation they've had that leads to fires. It's just the weather is so erratic that it's pretty clear that what we've done for decades and centuries is having a pretty significant impact. And if we don't do what we can to slow that down and to try to reverse it, the world is going to be a very different place for the next couple of generations. And so the legislation that we've passed here in Massachusetts really will change how we create energy and then how we use it. And I think the combination of those will have a significant impact, at least in our corner of the world, on climate change.
Do you think the state, John, can afford to give taxpayers two $250 rebates?
I believe so.
You do?
I certainly believe that the discussion about Chapter 62F, which is when you compare wage growth to revenue growth, and if revenue growth far exceeds wage growth, then it triggers the the Chapter 62F, which would prompt about $3 billion going back to taxpayers. We can certainly afford that. And then in our economic development bill, we have some structural tax changes that are in that bill, and we have the provisions that would give an additional $250. I believe that we should absolutely give the $3 billion through the tax credit for the next tax, when people fill out their tax forms next year. I think we should absolutely do that. And in terms of the structural tax changes, I think we should look at our revenue situation in December when we develop our consensus revenue figures for next year's budget, see where we're at, and then make a determination of what structural changes we can put in and when. And I believe that when we are in that, at that time, we will learn that we can do both.
Okay.
I may be wrong, but I believe at this stage that we have the ability. We're still in a pretty good revenue picture, at least for the fiscal year that closed, fiscal year 22, and so far in fiscal year 23, revenues remain solid. So I think we should be able to do both. But we have to anticipate that things are going to change. They always do. We have built our rainy day account to a historic high. It will be about $8 billion, which is very significant. That helps us with bonding and all those types of things, and it'll ease budget pressures should there be a downturn. But we know it's going to come, and we have to make sure that we're there and that we don't overreact right now.
With moving into transportation and talking about the MBTA, with the rail shutdown, the orange line, and rail work, I believe being done on the red line as well, has that changed the timeline for the bus facility in Quincy?
No, the bus facility timeline, was changed as a result of the cost of that facility. They put it out the bid, and the cost came in significantly higher than what they anticipated. So they are looking at what they're going to ultimately put there, see if they can change it, see if they can make it more affordable, and then put it back out to bid. So that was what has impacted the timeline of the bus facility down on the Lowe's site on Bergen Parkway. It really was a function of it coming back at a cost much higher than expected.
It's over $300 billion, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, and some of those construction costs have leveled off from the time that was put out to bid. Things have gotten not quite back to normal, but the supply chain has improved, so that may impact the next bid that comes in, the next series of bids that come in.
How do you feel about the millionaire's tax proposal, John?
I support it.
Did you?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion out there about what it does.
There is,
It basically puts the additional tax on money over in excess of $1 million.
Right.
It's not on every dollar that a millionaire makes. It is an additional tax on income in excess of $1 million. And I firmly believe that for people who are earning that type of money, that you have an obligation to pay taxes. We all have an obligation to pay taxes, and we try to make it as fair as possible. And I think putting that passing that fair share amendment is fair. I really do believe it to be fair, and we desperately need funding beyond where our revenue situation is now. This will be structural, so we will have the ability to do a better job of funding education and transportation going forward. And every time somebody calls the office and say, hey, I was on a state road over in the Blue Hills, whatever, and I had a pothole, or it took me an hour and a half to get to work. I had one person tell me that they flew in from Toronto and it took them an hour and a half to get to Logan Airport, and then an hour and 45 minutes to get from Logan Airport to Somerville. And so, every time you hear that, you realize we have to make these type of investments. Boston and the Boston area and all of Massachusetts depends on investments in our transportation infrastructure, and certainly investments in our educational systems.
Is that where the funding would go from
Yes.
that tax? So those two areas?
Those two areas,
How about
correct.
in your district specifically? Any highlights that you'd like to see it focused on?
We've got to figure out the red line,
Okay.
The MBTA, and I'm confident that we will. I've been a lifetime red line rider. I take it to the State House frequently, but we've got to make sure that it is safe, reliable, and that the service is predictable. And I think we will. I'd like to see us supplement that with ferry service out of Squantum Point Park. We continue to push that. It was good to see that in Attorney General Healy's proposed transportation plan, should she become governor, that ferries will play a role in that transportation plan. That's the first time that we've seen that acknowledged, so that's good. And then we just have to continue in the district to make sure that we can, at the state level, get as much money as possible to the local level, because that local aid, one, funds the schools, and it funds police, it funds fire, it funds senior programs, veterans programs, the libraries, DPW, and that takes some of the pressure off of the local taxpayer. It helps the municipalities take some of the pressure off the local taxpayer. So we'll continue to advocate for that. That is just critically important to every municipality in my district.
Appreciate your time, John. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll meet again in the future.
Yes,
Maybe November 8th.
there you go. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Happy election night.
Thank you. You too,
Thank
John.
you.
Appreciate it. And if you're just joining us, thank you for watching us here in Quincy Access Television, our live election 2022 coverage of the Massachusetts state primary. Joe Catalano here with Mark Crosby at the anchor desk, and we have already had a great lineup of guests, and we have more to come.
More to come, and we should mention that numbers we may be, by the end of the evening, have Quincy numbers.
Right. That's
But
right. We'll work
we
very
will just
closely.
have, exactly, we're working closely with Nicole Crispo and the City of Quincy Clerk's Office, the election department, for those numbers. But those would only reflect how Quincy votes.
That's right. And we do have for you this evening, we believe, the our Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Rayla Campbell, will be joining us. That's going to be a closely watched race here, along with the Attorney General's race across Massachusetts this evening. So we do have Rayla Campbell on Zoom joining us virtually this evening. So, Ms. Campbell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. We're outside because it's a little loud inside. We're having a nice party because, me and Jay McMahon are running unopposed. So we're going straight through to November.
Perfectly, which is perfect for us. Talk about, just talk about your platform. I know you're big with civic participation.
Yes, so my main platform is making sure that we're protecting our elections, that we have voter ID, and we're also protecting us as citizens when it comes to freedom of information or FOIA requests. Because we've had a lot of pushback that we have seen recently in the past couple of years when it comes to getting the information that is being taught to our children in public schools. I've also been going around and I've noticed that a lot of the parents are being shut down and they're not being given the information. And a lot of them don't realize that they can go through the Secretary of State's office and appeal. And as long as it's not breaking any laws or violating anybody's rights, that information is free to the public and they should have access to it. But I also want to make sure that we're protecting our history and our historical artifacts. This is where this country was founded and formed, right here in Massachusetts. And people need to know their history and they need to know how important it is to be involved civically and locally, because local elections affect us dramatically, not so much as the national policies, but when it comes to local, we have seen it over the past 2 years with COVID.
Ms. Campbell, can you talk a little bit about how you feel Massachusetts does in getting the word out about elections and getting the word out about voting, specifically to minority communities?
I think there's a major problem there, and we know that with redistricting, they actually moved a lot of the polling stations, and a lot of people weren't aware that their polling stations have been moved, and they're going and they're finding that out today for the first time. Also, we've had over the summer, we had elections on Saturdays, and a lot of people weren't aware that they were having elections on the weekends, especially during school vacation week and in April, which we saw a lot of. So it's not enough attention is being brought to local elections, not enough awareness for people to know what's going on locally in their town. We can see that when you see town meetings and how small the turnout is. And then also, why did they stop the free mailers that we'd always get that would tell everything that's going on in their town? Those mailers just completely disappeared. They're not out anymore. So a lot of people are disengaged, and that is a way of voter suppression. So my goal is to make sure that we are bringing civics back into school, that we are making sure we're protecting our students and teaching them the history and getting them the education that they so desperately need with knowing how the process works here. And then engaging the voters in the community and making sure that they know who's on the ballot, who is running for office, and the policies that they want to put forth in the communities, and making sure that that people in all of the communities know what's going on, because that civic engagement, not just 300, 400, even 1,000 people in a community of 80,000 is not enough people that represent the community. So we need to be getting out there, being boots on the ground, and engaging our small businesses, our corporations, our nonprofits, and our communities, especially standing up and protecting our police officers.
And do you feel that the state, Massachusetts, makes it difficult for folks to start a corporation or an LLC?
Absolutely. Massachusetts is one of the most difficult states and one of the most expensive states to try to start a corporation or an LLC. And we need to cut back those fees. There's no reason why they should have increased fees, especially right after a shutdown, when businesses were losing so much. They were losing employees. A lot of businesses were going out, and yet what did they do? They raised fees. Why did the Secretary of State raise fees? They also gave themselves a raise while people lost their jobs. We need to be making it beneficial for people to come and want to start a business here in Massachusetts. We used to be a manufacturing manufacturing capital of the world, and we need to get back to that. We need to make sure that we're inviting people, we're growing our businesses, that we're helping our communities, and we're building here in America and outsourcing, because we need to help our state, our economy. We're losing people by thousands, especially our gun manufacturers. We have a lot of gun owners. I'm one myself, and I want to make sure that we're protecting our Second Amendment rights, and we're thriving here in this state.
Ms. Campbell, thank you so much for your time. You were unopposed in the Republican primary, so will you join us on November 8th for our coverage in the general election?
Absolutely. I always see any interview, anybody that I'm very proud to be running as Republican here, born and raised in Massachusetts, strong patriot, and to be the first Black woman to ever make the ballot in Massachusetts' 234-year history is pretty amazing. So that itself is a win for us here as a Republican Party. We just got to make sure that we keep pushing forward and we keep pushing our message forward. We're Americans, and we're Americans first. We don't see skin color, we only see red, white, and blue. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. Oh, everybody wants to say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The modern way to cover elections.
Absolutely.
Virtual interviews. Speaking of, we have another one lined up for you. Mr. Paul Yorkes will be joining us, and he's a candidate for county commissioner here in Norfolk County. So, Mr. Yorkes, good evening. Can you unmute yourself, Mr. Yorkes, so we can hear you?
Can you hear me all right now?
There you are.
There you are. Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Great.
Then we're good.
As you were out and about today, I mean, it was a rainy day naturally, but what was your feeling at the polls? What did you experience?
Well, I was able to visit several communities, several polls. The rain did not dampen my spirits, did not dampen the spirits of voters. From what I'm hearing, the turnout in the western part of Norfolk County has been pretty high, higher than is typical for this kind of election. And I'm feeling pretty good. I have absolutely no idea what the outcome of the election will be. There's no polling that's been done. The outcome will be determined by the voters from the 28 cities and towns in Norfolk County.
Well, we certainly needed the rain, so maybe folks were happy to see it because we're in a drought. Talk about just, I know one of the aspects of the county commissioner's duties is the Norfolk County Agricultural School, Norfolk Aggie. What would you like to see there?
Well, Norfolk Aggie is an absolutely incredible resource right now for high school students throughout the county. And there are many high school age children who are not from Norfolk County who have chosen to attend Norfolk Aggie as well. And I think that's fantastic. I think there's opportunities for the resources of Norfolk Aggie to also serve the adult population in Norfolk County. In some cases at Norfolk Aggie and Walpole. And I think I would like to explore, if I'm fortunate in being elected, explore opportunities to extend what I'll call adult education around the county so that people realize what great services and what great resources are present there. But let's move those resources, when practical, to other places in the county.
Mr. Yorkes, I know that you've been involved in a municipal government in your hometown of Medway for many years, but what was it that prompted you to look into county government office?
It's a great question, and thank you for that. I really believe very strongly in transparent government. In a small town like Medway, whatever is going on, everybody knows about it. And if they don't know about it, they can find out about it. They can question at select board meetings, at conservation commission meetings, at planning and economic development board meetings. And what I found with county government is that the vast majority of people did not know what was going on at county government. The fact that the commissioners meet at 1 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, when most people cannot take off work or take off school to participate, observe, or listen to a meeting. And then I became more aware of a proposal from the commissioners to cut down originally a lot of forest, now a smaller amount of forest, but also a meadow, and instead of having the forest and the meadow, to have a solar farm. And based upon what I know, that doesn't make any sense, both logically and scientifically. And so I started getting more involved in that, learned more about it, and decided that I wanted to oppose that idea, and have opposed the idea, because the county is in desperate need of a strategic plan for all county programs and services. It's in desperate need of a plan that deals with energy sustainability, which it doesn't have right now. And the county lacks a plan dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in my career, both in higher education and my current career in real estate, all three of those things are very important. I've had experience doing them both locally and at a county level in Maryland. And I said to myself, you know what? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution.
And
We appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, unfortunately, but I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this evening.
Well, let me share two things, because I was listening to the earlier interview. I want to thank Quincy Access Television for doing what you're doing, because you're spreading the word, which is so desperately needed. You're giving candidates the opportunity to talk to voters, and I really appreciate it and wanted to thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your kind words, Mr. Yorkes. Thank you very much, and good luck this evening.
Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And continuing with our virtual interviews, we're able to do this now through the marvel of modern technology. We want to welcome to the program Hamilton Soares Rodriguez, a Republican candidate for the 8th Congressional District. And Mr. Rodriguez, are you able to hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, we hear you here as well. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Rodriguez, talk about a big part of your platform is supporting first responders and, of course, police. Police are part of that. Talk about that, if you could.
Well, basically, I plan on advocating to ensure the safety and well-being of the population, protect the border, and medical freedoms. All in a nutshell, I support the blue. I back the blue 100%. And when I get into office as a congressman, I'm basically going to make it rain for the blue. I'm going to try to get resources and funding as much as I can for Massachusetts, for the 8th Congressional District, for first responders. I think safety is the first priority, and the border protection is first priority in this country to fight against crime.
How did you feel, Mr. Rodriguez, about the police reform bill here in Massachusetts?
I basically have to look into it a little bit deeper, but from what I understand is I'm not really too happy with it. I think there should be more in-depth control that the police officers should have on the streets, and the police officers should have more liberty as far as fighting crime. And when I get into office, I'm basically gonna put policies in place to give powers back to the police officers. Of course, police officers have to abide by rules and regulations, but right now, they want police officers to become social workers, basically, and it's basically scaring away people from the profession. We need to have more tighter security in this country, and my policy is going to be geared towards that.
Mr. Rodriguez, you're running as a businessman. You,
Yes.
I believe, owned small businesses along the way. I suppose talk about that in relation to your campaign and how you see that benefiting you.
Yes, I've run a real estate firm, brokerage firm, and a property flipping firm for over 23 years. And my experience looking at balance sheets, trends, sales by day, sales by month, sales by year, forecasting, and so on and so forth. I understand what line item expenditures are. I know what revenue is. I understand what inflation is, cost analysis, and so on and so forth. I understand statistics. I'm a statistics guy. I'm a numbers guy. So when I go into office, I know what I'm looking at when I look at spreadsheets. I'm not just going to vote based on emotions and what people are telling me to vote on. I'm going to vote on reason and what I see on spreadsheets and a statistical analysis. And I'm going to come with my proper outcome that's going to benefit the 8th Congressional District when it comes to funding.
If elected, Mr. Rodriguez, can you talk a little bit about the bipartisanship in Washington right now and how you might work to cross party lines?
Yes. So basically, I'm a Republican. I support Republican views and values. Of course, I got to work with others across the party line. Of course, that's no doubt. But I'm not going to compromise my values when I work across party lines. I'm going to work across party lines, shake hands, high five, and everything else. But I'm never going to compromise my views and my values. Of course, we have to compromise in certain things, as long as it's ethically right and going to help the people who I represent. Yes, I'm gonna vote in favor of Democrats and also Republicans, but it has to be something that's gonna help the people of the 8th Congressional. And if it's not, I'm not interested in negotiating. It has to be something that's gonna help the people and help them progress in the 8th Congressional.
And what are some of those issues you see in the 8th District that need attention in Congress?
First and foremost, first responders, police officers, EMTs, nurses. There's a lot of folks that need funding for their departments, especially the VA hospital. I'm going to tackle that agenda. That is something that needs to be revamped. Veterans and basically police officers. A lot of police officers cannot afford to live in towns that they work in. The cost of living in Massachusetts is very high. Why is that? We talk about inflation, but what is inflation? Basically, a lot of the inflation has to do with taxation. If we kind of minimize taxation and also minimize expenditures, we can have an equilibrium where people can afford to live in Massachusetts. So what I'm trying to bring to Massachusetts and to the 8th Congressional District is affordability. It's quite simple. They talk about housing stock. I'm a housing guy. There's plenty of housing stock in Massachusetts. It's just that equilibrium part of housing that needs to be done. There's so much concentration in Boston with housing, dense population, where if we get opportunity to Western Massachusetts, mid-Massachusetts, where we bring government agencies to spread them out throughout Massachusetts, we'll be able to reduce the cost of living where everyone's not interested in living in Boston, where you have to pay $3,000 a month in rent in a one-bedroom apartment. So if we spread out resources throughout the state, this will minimize inflation, reduce taxation, and also reduce spending that we need to do in the state of Massachusetts.
Good to talk to you, Mr. Rodriguez. Really appreciate you joining us for our coverage this evening.
I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you.
We continue our coverage here of election 2022, Quincy Access Television's live coverage of our state primary election with a particular focus on some of both the Republican and Democratic candidates on the ballot this evening.
It was a nice and has been a nice balance, and we certainly thank the candidates that have taken the time to join us in studio or via Zoom, so remotely as well. Also, a lot of the candidates did participate in the 5-minute message announcements, which we here at Quincy Access Television are well known for, I would say.
Absolutely. We heard some of the candidates mention that they appreciated that opportunity, so we were glad to provide that for them. We can't, as in years past, provide numbers from wards and precincts because of the way vote counting has changed. There's now central tabulation that takes place at City Hall for the mail-in and early voting. And then at the end of the evening, when the polls close, the wards and precincts report in, and then it all gets tallied up, and we do finally get the final numbers. And if we do receive those while we're still providing our coverage this evening, we'll bring them to you, of course.
We certainly will. And Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our next guests to continue on the line of interviews that we have been doing here this evening.
I think there'll be familiar faces and names to a lot of Democrats, at least here in the city of Quincy. The Quincy Citywide Democratic Committee Chair Alicia Gardner and Bob LaRocca are joining us. So, lady and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening. Great to be here.
Guys? How are you?
Great.
Nice to see you both.
Nice to see you
Happy
both.
Election Day.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Alicia, were you out at the polls?
Believe it or not, I wasn't.
What?
Because I voted last Thursday.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because I did take the advantage of the last breath of summer. So I was down in my sister's in Howard.
It's not over
Till
yet.
2 o'clock today. So
A great
I
degrees
gotta
this
be
weekend
honest.
coming up. It's not over yet.
it isn't. It isn't.
But a great
So-
example of the flexibility now that we have to vote here in
Exactly.
Massachusetts, right?
Well, you know, I thought, oh, I'll be back in plenty of time. I said, you know what, I'm not going to risk that. You know, I've been voting since 1972. My first election was with George McGovern, and that's been 50 years now, and I'm not going to break that streak. So it was nice to have the, the choice.
We'll talk
to
about
go
that.
in. Yeah.
We'll talk about early voting, mail-in voting, and how that has really changed the voting landscape.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we saw during the pandemic the success of using things like mail-in voting, and I think that's why we saw a real call to have those options extended, and the legislature did that, and now, you know, we have several options on how you can vote. You can vote early in person, you can vote by mail, or you can vote on election day, and I think it's a good thing for democracy to have a lot of options. So
How did you vote, Bob?
I voted early last Thursday.
Okay. So, okay.
You know, it's good. Yeah, I was able to fit it in between work
Right.
things, and that convenience and the ease of access is really critical to making it so that everybody can vote.
Yeah. Alicia, the Citywide Democratic Committee had a unique opportunity earlier this year for voters.
We did.
Yeah, talk
It
about
was-
the forum at Braintree Town Hall.
It was hugely successful. It was a great collaboration between the towns of Braintree, Weymouth, Holbrook, Hingham, and ourselves. And we had a good 100 people
Really?
come into that auditorium that evening. And they were able to hear from 9 of the 11 contested races candidates. So that was huge to be able to get that many 2 weeks to the day before election and to come and speak to them. And it was so well received. And well done, I will say, with the help of Kathy Tuffy from Braintree and our chair in Weymouth and Hingham and Holbrook as well. The word really got out. We're very grateful to QATV because they also broadcasted it, and as well as Braintree.
Recorded it, I believe. And then
Correct.
shared. And that's one of the great things about local access really working with one another and using the programs to get even a wider audience.
Exactly.
And in this case, certainly beneficial.
It was, and I so appreciate it because I did turn it on, and there we were, and I'm like, this gives residents the opportunity, and it was very deliberately done with 2 weeks left, because a lot of people are not really paying much attention, and for the fact that primary day crept up literally the day after Labor Day, we really knew that that was the time to be able to push it. Not too early in the summer, but 2 weeks ahead, and sure enough, a lot of the candidates then started to come out with their ads too, to make people aware that there was an election. And we really did, I think, a great job highlighting our Democratic candidates that evening.
I think that was smart too. My son just started college, so this forum was held while most of the kids were still here. Absolutely.
Correct. And they could vote as well.
Yeah, and a lot of these candidates, it's challenging to get their message out, right? I mean, it's over the summer and it's crowded races, and sometimes it's
expensive.
down ballot expensive.
Yep.
So when you can do something that is, you're able to make a pitch to multiple communities at the same time, I know candidates really found that to be valuable.
Right.
I think, Bob, the majority of voters in Massachusetts, probably in Quincy too, are unenrolled now, right? Not affiliated. How do you think that's going to play out this evening?
It's really interesting, right? It's every cycle we kind of see this. Massachusetts has this, I think reputation and known as being a very blue state, but we do have a lot of unenrolled voters, and I think what we'll see in time, I think I saw some numbers today, the projected turnout, but the organization called Mass Inc. did some projected turnouts at between 800 and 850,000. We're going to vote in the Democratic primary, and about 300,000, a little bit more in the Republican primary today. And that's actually a pretty good number compared to other primaries in gubernatorial years. So, I think we'll see it break more towards Democrats. But, we've seen the opposite happen in the past too, and I think it will also come down to the general election too, right?
Well, look at the Baker-Polito administration in a blue state.
Yep, absolutely.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And very, extremely popular. Very popular.
What does the citywide committee have in store leading up to November 8th, Alicia?
Well, we do have our exciting, and I think it's going to be well attended, annual breakfast. I think we're on our 32nd or 33rd year of providing this breakfast at the end of October. So it is scheduled for Sunday, October 23rd at the Sons of Italy at 9 o'clock. And a lot of the candidates really depend on that breakfast to get their word out. We get a great response from our Democratic candidates now, who will be our nominees to that breakfast. So, I encourage people to come to that as well and to hear from the candidates there as well. So that's what's on the horizon. We do meet every second Tuesday of the month. And besides that, what else do we have coming up with?
I'm sure we'll have a number of volunteer opportunities, whether it's doing standouts or going and knocking on doors. We'll have those scheduled once the primaries end, and so that we can help drive out the vote in the general.
And for folks to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Quincy Dems. That's our Facebook page as well as our website. And to Bob's point, thank you, Bob, for reminding me, we have been doing some standouts prior to the primary, but they will be every weekend now between, this weekend until Election Day, that we will be out holding signs for all of our Democratic candidates.
Very good.
So, and we're also hoping to find, and it's getting harder and harder to do in the city of Quincy, a vacant storefront that we could have a regional headquarters in. So hopefully we'll be opening that as well.
Stay tuned to your social media for that, I'm sure.
Please, please go to our Facebook page or our website. You'll get all the information there.
And I have to compliment you on your earrings. Those
Thank
are
you
so
very much.
fitting.
Thank you. I never miss an opportunity when
You
it's talking
opportunist.
about. I am. And I have my little proud to be a Democrat right here.
I should have brought my.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, both.
She is
jacket would
too
be
for you.
enough, but-
She's got you covered.
Alicia, Bob, thank you both very much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thank you
It's a
very
pleasure.
much for inviting us.
You're welcome.
Really
Please come back on
appreciate it.
November 8th.
Look forward to it.
All right.
Take
Thanks.
care.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here at Quincy Access Television as our election night coverage continues. We do want to welcome virtually now our next guest. Actually, I believe she'll be in person this evening. And if you stay tuned, we'll have Sharon Santolo joining us here in studio. She's a Republican candidate for the 2nd Norfolk District, now held by State Representative Tacky Chan. So if you stay tuned for that, we'll be bringing Sharon to you in just a few moments.
I do want to mention to the folks, though we don't have poll workers, we don't have folks at the poll gathering numbers for this particular election, we still do require volunteers to assist us in not only during election night, but on events leading up to election, and quite honestly, through any production that Quincy Access Television does. We are so member-based.
Absolutely, volunteer-dependent. Volunteers make the difference here at QATV, whether it be a concert that we need folks to go to record for us, or even a government committee meeting, anything at all. Or if you prefer to be on camera, we can arrange that as well.
Absolutely, we are our members. Members make the difference.
Absolutely.
That sounds familiar.
Yes, it does. I believe that's a slogan somewhere.
Yes. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our next guest, as promised.
Yes, as promised, in studio, in person, not virtually, Sharon Santolo. And Sharon, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, first of all, Republican candidate for the 2nd Norfolk District here in Quincy.
Correct, yes, you are.
Good evening.
Good evening. Nice, thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for
Appreciate it.
accepting our invitation. We appreciate
Yeah,
it very
I think this
much.
is much better than Zoom. I can never get the Zoom right anyway.
Well,
so
in person is
I'm
always
glad.
better than
Yeah.
Zoom.
Absolutely.
So, talk about you're a paramedic.
Yes.
Talk about your interest in government.
So it started probably about 10, 12 years ago, just getting people to sign for petitions for different ballot questions. So I just kind of got into it that way, and then just following politics over the years, and and that's basically how I got into it. And just like talking to people, getting becoming part of the Quincy Republican City Committee meeting. So that's that kind of got me into it also.
So it's your first foray to elective office?
Yes, it is.
How
It
has
is.
the experience been for you?
Well, it's not fun. I'll tell everyone out there, it's really not fun.
Okay.
But it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
But if you're passionate about something, and I don't agree with Tacky's, especially the recent law that he passed about the driver's licenses for people here illegally. I basically spent my entire summer standing out getting people to sign the petition to get that question on the ballot. So it's things like that, laws that are passed that don't make a lot of sense, and it's painful when people now have to spend time, money, and energy to have to repeal things that the legislature put through. So.
Your platform, you are considered fiscally conservative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. So I don't like when it things are spent on ridiculous items. I know I'm on Mass Fiscal Alliance quite often, and I look at the things that the budgets and what things are spent on, and some things really bother me. Like most people, $17 million for some towns golf course. And I know businesses need money, sometimes cash, especially during the whole COVID thing. And I understand that, but I don't think people are watching the money closely enough, because you always hear about ridiculous fraud that someone makes off with $250,000 or $1.5 million, and it's frustrating.
So would you say, as you're out there meeting people during the election process,
Mm-hmm.
what item or items are more often heard? What do they ask you about? What do they tell you they'd like to see done better?
Well, I think mainly with the whole the Family Mobility Act that was passed, a lot of people are very upset about that, because it was kind of, they put a name on something and it all sounds good, well and good, but when it comes down to it, when you read what's in the bill, like those famous lines of Nancy Pelosi, like, we have to pass the bill to see what's in it. No, we shouldn't do that. It should be upfront. And when these things are passed and people, they see that people that are here illegally can actually get, when they get their driver's license, they're automatically put on the voter rolls. People don't understand that. And when you explain things to them like that, they get very upset because they're like, well, why was this done? I'm like, I don't know. And that's why we have to, and that was one of the main driving forces for me. And then when I go around and talk to people, I'm like, well, your rep voted for this, so you might want to, change your, even Democrats, Independent, Republicans, it's across the board. People are pretty upset about this. So,
Why choose to participate in the Republican primary then, not as a Democrat or just an unenrolled voter?
Why am I? Well, I grew up a Democrat, and like everybody in Quincy, and I always joked that my father had 7 votes. He had his 6 children and him, because we'd say, Dad, well, how should we vote?
Right.
And we just voted that way. But then as I started getting a little bit more involved in politics, I started actually changing my parents' mind, and now they became Republicans.
Interesting.
And, just because, like being physically conservative, I just don't think that, just the Democratic way really doesn't do it for me anymore.
So I think on your platform is make more, keep more money.
Yeah. Well, yes, and limited government, and not fund the government as much as we are, because it just, once you fund them, they just want more and more and more. Where I just think of pulling back a little bit and letting, like you said, the people keep more of their money.
How do you think your experience being an EMT will help you on Beacon Hill?
Just the healthcare issues, and just like social issues too, because that's what we see every day. Problems. So, you can't just go out there and say, well, stop all the money for everything. I mean, everything has to be looked at to see like where it's going to be most effective. At schools, I mean, what's being taught there, and how it's being taught, and that can be a big issue for some people. So, but I think you have to really look at things to see how, what's going to be the outcome.
I was listening to NPR, WBUR earlier today, and there was a mention of how healthcare costs in this state are astronomical compared to other states.
Yeah, that is an issue. I'm not, I don't want to be like, I know everything about everything. So, I mean, the healthcare costs are high, and they are ridiculous. Just the cost of the medications. How we fix that, I don't know. With Obamacare, we thought that was going to fix everything. It obviously doesn't. Making people buy insurance. Some people don't need insurance, so I was happy with the last administration that they pulled back on that, where you had to, they basically made you buy insurance. So, but it does cause a problem, because now there's not all that revenue going to the insurance companies. But, the cost-wise, I mean, it is ridiculous in the state. I mean, how we pull back on that, and how we figure out, especially with like some medications, the pharmaceutical companies, that's a big problem. I think we need to look into that to see, who is, I mean, we are obviously paying for all the money, and especially with all the COVID shots that came out. We all had to fund that. And in my job, I was actually going to be let go because I didn't want to get the vaccine.
Well, I wondered, I was going to ask you about mask mandates and the whole mandate regarding COVID.
Yeah, so that's something that it surprises me, because in this medical mecca that we're in, we're all still wearing masks. You don't have to wear masks. I feel bad when I see people wearing a mask, and I know some people are, immunocompromised. I understand that. But generally, most of the people I see aren't, and they have to wear masks, and it really doesn't help, especially with COVID. I mean, we were wearing the N95 masks at the start of this all. It's very hard to operate in those and go about your daily business in those. That's the only thing that's going to really protect you. But I mean, then they say with the N95, if you wear it for too long, it's no longer effective, because they're wet from the condensation, and air's getting in there anyways. We had to approach it safely, and I understand at first we were, we looked like something out of a horror movie, all gowned up in masks and a huge shield on and everything. Very difficult to work. That was understandable at the beginning, but now that we know so much more about it, well, actually last year we knew a lot about it, and we knew that the masks really didn't work and they were ineffective. And then the whole thing with children, that they really don't need to wear the mask. They're not really, they don't die from COVID, you know, unless they have pre-existing conditions. So that was, I think, a real problem and a real issue, and you know, not only the masking, but keeping them out of school. There's so many things that, I mean, now they're admitting that children are behind, you know, in social and, you know, educational. So, so that was a big problem, and I just don't think they listened enough, especially our governor. That was a problem, you know.
We'll see you out on the campaign trail, Ms. Santola. Thank
right.
you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Good luck.
And
Thank
please
you
come
for
back
joining
on
us.
November 8th.
All right, will do. Thanks.
Okay. Continuing our coverage, Mark, I know that you have had an opportunity to talk with one of the candidates for Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll.
I did, and I believe that's what we will go to right now. Hello, I'm joined by Kim Driscoll, who is the Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor, and she stopped by, as I had just mentioned, to chat with us this election day and tell us about her campaign, and I suppose tell us how it's going out there today, Election Day. So welcome, Kim.
Thanks for having me. It's good
I
to
should
be
say
indoors
welcome.
where
I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's good to be indoors where it's not raining.
Absolutely, absolutely. I should say welcome, Mayor, because you are the mayor of Salem and have been since 2006.
You got it. Yeah. And not Kim is fine. Yeah.
Kim is fine. Talk about your campaign, and again, you've been in politics since 2006. What made you decide to run for Lieutenant Governor?
You know, I feel so fortunate to have been mayor for the last 16 years in Salem. Prior to that, I worked for the city of Chelsea as they were coming out of receivership as their legal counsel and their deputy city manager. So I have a real love of local government. I know it's the branch of government most people rely on, whether it's educating your kids or keeping your neighborhood safe or investing in places that matter. And serving as mayor for the last 16 years, I've definitely realized you need a strong partner to really be a successful community. And I'm hoping in this role as Lieutenant Governor, I can be a strategic ally for our cities and towns, really championing the work on the ground. Having been in this position, I know what it's like on the trenches, and I know the importance of the work that's happening in our main streets across this Commonwealth, and really want to be an ally.
And we should say that you are on the ticket with Democratic candidate Maura Healey.
That's correct. You don't technically run as a team until after today, right? Because we have this primary underway. But I've endorsed Maura Healey. Think she'd make a great governor. And that, frankly, we have just a great matchup of our skill sets. Somebody who's been a local leader, and then with her statewide experience, be a strong team to confront the challenges we have. And we're in for some choppy waters. We're going to need people who have experience getting stuff done. And certainly as mayor, I know that role.
We talked, well, based on your gear, and when you walked in here about the rain today,
Yep.
one of the items on your platform is climate.
You know, as a coastal community, we see rising seas. We know the impact that climate change is having across all of our communities, and we've really got a lot of work to do to lean into what we're going to have to accomplish over the next several years. As a local leader, I've worked hard to think about transportation and limiting the amount of greenhouse gas emissions coming from cars, coming from the type of transit that's not necessarily in our best interest. We've worked hard to make sure that we're thinking about building conversions and what actions and steps we can take locally. But you can't do it alone. Again, you need that strong state partner to really tackle our most pressing challenges. So I'm hoping to be able to influence our agenda and help implement it as well.
Another item would be the high housing costs.
Number one issue in every community I've been in is the high cost of housing. A place like Salem, we used to say you used to be able to pour coffee and pour beer for a living and put a roof over your head, and that's just no longer the case. We're in Quincy today, in from the rain on Election Day, just out at a poll here, and people were talking about the inability for their children who grew up in the neighborhood to sort of think about buying a house there with their families because of the high cost of housing. We don't have enough housing, we don't have enough affordable housing, and we don't have housing that meets the growing age population. Some of our fastest growing census numbers show that older adults are living longer. Good news. Bad news, we don't have enough housing or the type of housing that we need.
Living longer sounds good when you're in, well, for me, in my 50s. Older adults.
Living longer is good. Not having enough housing is bad.
Is bad. And lastly, transportation.
wow, what a hot mess we have going on. For those of us who are in Greater Boston, served by the MBTA communities, Salem is the #1 commuter rail stop, so we know how pivotal that is for our communities. And frankly, it's embarrassing that we don't have a system we can rely on. We've had a bit of an inspiration gap when it comes to public transportation. I think there's more work we can do. As I mentioned previously, we've leaned in. We have our own city-owned ferry. We have an on-demand rideshare service. We have an on-demand car share service. There's more work that we can do to innovate technology with modern-day ways that people get around. I mean, Quincy, a city on the waterfront. We were here last week meeting with Mayor Koch, Representative Ears, and talking about what a water transportation network could look like that would benefit our coastal communities who are close to Boston. There's no other large metropolitan city or capital city like a Boston that doesn't have water transportation service. So I'm hopeful that as a statewide leader, we can influence not only ensuring that our transportation systems are safe, effective, reliable, and affordable, but also that we're willing to be inspired about other ways to move people around.
Well, Kim, I want to thank you for coming in today. We wish you well during this election. And I know as soon as you leave here, or what's your next?
We are heading to Cambridge, and then we're in Dorchester, and then we're back towards the North Shore. It's been a great experience getting around the state. I'm really hopeful that folks will put their confidence in me to be their next lieutenant governor and really lead this Commonwealth in an opportunity to get stuff done. And that's what mayors do every day.
Very good. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
And good luck.
Thank you.
So we're really happy to welcome to our coverage here on election night 2022 the Speaker of the House of Representatives here in the state of Massachusetts, 3rd Norfolk Representative Ron Mariano, also of Quincy. Ron, good to see you.
Good to be here, boys. It's good to be with you.
This is an exciting day. It's primary election day here in Massachusetts. Were you out at the polls earlier?
Yeah, I was out this morning before the rains really picked up. The turnout was sporadic, and around 8:39, it was fairly steady, and then it dropped way off. So, it's hard to get a handle on who's voting now. With so many options that people have, you really wonder who's going to show up at the polls, especially on a rainy day.
And how do you feel about those options?
I like them. I think it is encouraged participation. I think we've seen that 2 years ago when we instituted a lot of these changes. The turnout was very, very heavy. And we're hoping this election is another repeat of that, that it's a miserable day out there. And I just came in, it was almost around 5 o'clock, and it's raining pretty hard. And if you were home, I know it'd be a challenge to get you back out to go vote. So I think that having that option of mail or early voting is very important to most people. So.
How do you feel about the prospect, Ron, of possibly having a Democratic governor in Massachusetts?
Well, I've had them before.
Certainly, yeah. It's been a while, though.
It doesn't change much.
Yeah.
The issues are always the same. The setting of priorities by the governor is always challenged by the legislative branch. So that doesn't matter who's in the governor's chair. So.
Let's talk about some recent legislation and the delivery of mental health services.
Well, where do you want me to start? I mean, we each did a mental health bill, both the Senate and the House. This year, the Senate did an awful lot on adult services in the delivery of adult services, where the House side was focused mostly on adolescent and teenage mental health. It was the feeling on the House side, and I can only speak for the House side, that the year out of school and the isolation that kids have had to go through, especially teenagers, have created huge spikes in alienation and in some awful cases, people harming themselves, cutting and even suicides. So we were very, very concerned with that, and we wanted to make sure that services were available for kids who started to show some sign that we could get them some help, get them the help immediately, make sure that they were seeing professionals. and that their concerns were addressed. And we think the bill does this. Obviously, it's like anything else. There's a price tag that comes with it, and we're working on funding that now. So.
The governor recently, as you know, filed a supplemental bill, spending bill.
He files 3 or 4 supplementals a year.
Yes. Any idea or opinion as to how that will fly in the House?
Well, we have to file a sup to balance the accounts, and so we'll be working on that. The issue for me is the spending. It's been well documented in the newspapers that, you know, we had an expenditure piece that was worth $3.5 billion, and it got hung up when the governor informed us that the 62F, which is a little-known law that was passed in 1987, which has only been implemented once in the 30-odd years that it's been in effect, that we got another bill the week we were going in to finalize our budget for another $3 billion. And that sort of made me question where we were in the spending process when you had the price of the price of gasoline getting up over $5, the fear of a real recession on the horizon, and folks being very concerned about employment. It was a signal for me to slow down a little bit on the spending, and we did, and it was my position that you know, if we owe the $3 billion, we'll pay the $3 billion. If the law is on the books and it says that we owe it, we owe it. No one's trying to duck the responsibility of paying the $3 billion. But at the same token, it does change the way you view some of your other expenditures. And, you know, we have a lot of things that have come up in the meantime. We have the T, the federal report on the T. No one is really sure how much that is going to cost. And obviously to Quincy, the T is extremely important, and anyone on the South Shore. The red line is very, very important. It looks like we'll get the orange line straightened out, but the next big problem is the red line. And so we need money to pay for that. So, you know, the expenditures keep coming. We passed an early childhood education bill that the price tag is about $1.5 billion, I think. And so we want to get that done. So, you know, we're looking at all things. The tax cuts, I think some of them are very worthwhile. I certainly like the estate tax reduction. I think that's time. We're an outlier in that. We're one of the highest estate tax states in the 50 states. So that's something that should be changed. And we're going to start to work around the edges and see what we can salvage from the budget Echo Dev bill, knowing that we still have that $3 billion that we're going to have to pay.
Well, Speaker, I want to thank you for joining us. So much more to talk about, but we have a limited time today. We certainly want you to get out there as well and enjoy the rest of voting here in the city of Quincy. So, okay. Speaker, a pleasure, and certainly we welcome you back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was quick.
Thank you. There'll be more to come with Election 2022 from Quincy Access Television's studios. Joining us is Representative Tacky Chan. He is a Democrat up for re-election. Representative Chan, thank you for joining us.
Remote. Oh, thank you for coming to my dining room again, Mark and Joe. It's always wonderful to see you on this rainy primary day.
Thank you for having us.
In your dining room.
Were you out of the
polls today, Tacky?
I just went out and voted with my mom today at Beechwood No, and that's the extent of my poll appearances, way to put it. About 245, Ward 5, Precinct 4. There was about 110 people that submitted ballots at that point.
It's kind of your take on this primary election day and how the political process is playing out here in Massachusetts.
Well, I think the mail-in ballots and early voting will have enormous impact. When we did early voting, God, it's like 8 years ago now, it feels like. There was definitely an impact on the final election day, primary day as well, because it relieved a lot of pressure on the polling locations when there was heavy turnout. We all know that there's a very large ballot right now, both the Republican and Democratic side in the primary process, and it's been many, many, many weeks now of getting out to vote. So between mail-in ballots as well as early voting, I think it's going to be a pretty good turnout this year.
Can we talk about, I know this is an election night program, but the recent EBT scam? And I know that, I believe it's on your Twitter account that there are steps to secure your personal information.
Yeah, like everything else, having your PINs and your passwords change on a regular basis is very important. And what has been happening with some people in EBT is their cards have been skimmed. So skimming is when a third-party electronic device is able to read the magnetic strip, whether they're passing by you in the street or attached to a reader, a card reader, like when you go to a store, and then it skims the information of how to access your card. As a result, they're able to basically rob you and rob the state of the EBT funds, and it's almost impossible to catch. So the thing to do is, you feel it's been stolen in this format, definitely contact state. Obviously you can contact my office and we can see we can help you out, the DTA. But most importantly, go to my Twitter website and my Facebook account and take a quick peek, as well as the DTA website, about how to change the PIN numbers. And make a habit of doing that.
Tacky, curious, I asked the House Speaker this question also, but curious to get your take on the prospect of possibly having a Democratic governor and how that might change kind of the dynamic on Beacon Hill.
Well, I'm not as old as the speaker. I've been around that long. However, I've only had 8 years with Democratic Governor Deval Patrick. People tend to forget I've been around since Bill Bowden government. So I've worked with many administrations and their staff and all the different forms. So I do have some, as I say, different insight regarding gubernatorial administrations because of staff level perception, as opposed to being an elected person's perception. It's nice to have both points of view. So the idea of having a Democrat in the corner office is very appealing, obviously, because the majority party would like to have a friendly ear and hopefully similar agendas. I won't say the same, because everybody is entitled to their own opinion as elected officials. But we hope to have a new type of working relationship, and what that relationship will be, we'll find out come next year.
Representative, just briefly, I know we only have a brief moment left. The Mental Health ABC Act?
Yes, it's a good bill to provide more mental health access to the general public. As we've all felt the past 3 years, especially during COVID, getting more help and finding help is challenging. Another thing we discovered is that the need for more people to engage in this field. So, having legislation that the governor signed to provide people more access, including things like phone numbers, the ability to encourage more people to enter the field, to make sure people don't feel like they've been alone in this very challenging period we still live in, is crucial. So we've been talking and addressing these issues incrementally over many years. And the most recent events have definitely moved us even further down the road to look at the larger picture of mental health. So, the most important part is actually, I believe, the 988 number. I'm going to get that wrong. I always get stuff wrong on numbers on the show. But, that one phone number for mental health access, centralized area where people can contact for help where they're having serious concerns, someone to talk to, is going to play a big part in people's lives moving forward.
Well, Representative, appreciate your time. As always, you are unopposed on today's Democratic primary ticket, so we will hopefully catch up with you on November 8th for our final election coverage.
No, good to see you both, and I will see you both soon.
Great.
Continuing on with our election 2022 coverage here on Quincy Access Television, we welcome our next guest to the program, Republican candidates for governor here in Massachusetts, former state representative Jeff Diehl. Mr. Diehl, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen, for having me.
Certainly our pleasure. Wanted to ask you, first of all, have you been out and about at the polls on this primary day, and what's your take on how things are shaping up?
Yeah, so my tradition is that I go eat at Martin's restaurant up in Abington. I've been doing that since I was first elected in 2010 as a state representative. And then I stop by Whitman with my wife to cast our ballots. And then we go around the district to talk to people who are working the polls. But the fact is, now that I'm running for governor, the district has gotten a lot bigger. So we have been driving around all over, out to the Cape, the South Coast area, and we're heading out to a few more places tonight before we get to our victory party, hopefully at the precinct 10 in Weymouth. So yeah, it's a great chance to go out there and talk to voters who are at the polls, talk to the workers who are holding signs for you, and just making sure that you get out the vote, but also thanking people for the hard work over the last several months that it took to make sure that when I won the convention back in May, overwhelmingly 71% to 29%, we knew our work wasn't done then. We still had a primary ultimately to go forward with. And, we've been making sure that we get the message out everywhere we can. My running mate, Leah Allen, is also going to be joining me tonight. And we're just excited. We think that we're going to be able to move forward and take the message to the next level for the next 2 months to the general.
Looking at your platform, I'm going to just take one item out, and that's education. And your thoughts on education, you're looking to improve education. And of course, countrywide, really, right now, there are teacher shortages.
Yeah. No, what's really too bad is that the pandemic put a lot of people, state workers were forced to either get a vaccine or else they lost their job. Some took early retirement. So you've had nurses like my running mate who were fired because she was actually nursing during when she had her baby during the pandemic, and she was did not want to get the vaccine. She was nervous about that. So she lost her job. But you're right. Some teachers, I think, took retirements, were shorthanded there. The MBTA is under federal oversight because right now there's not enough workers for the T. But when it comes to education, I got to tell you, when I first ran for state representative in 2010, education was the key thing that I ran about. We weren't getting enough funds in my district to make sure that we could provide the quality education we wanted. I ran against an incumbent who was the vice chair of education on the House committee there, and I defeated him because I think it was so important to me at the time. It's that much more important now. The pandemic, we lost, it felt like at least a year or two for some of these kids with that remote learning. Not all the public schools were ready to adapt to the online learning courses. Some of the teachers weren't comfortable with the technology, and every school district really had different platforms and programs. My wife and I opened a learning pod. We own a performing arts school that she runs. I don't. But we have big dance studios, and we use those rooms for learning pods for kids during the pandemic so they could get online. We saw them having a tough time with the masks on and the teachers having trouble with the curriculum. So we were behind there. The other thing about education, too, though, is I think parents want to have more of a say. The fact of the matter is school boards were kind of resistant to parents coming in and trying to talk about the curriculum. So I wanted to give parents the option that that their dollars, their tax dollars educating their kids can be used the way they want to, right? Public school, great. The money, in my opinion, could follow the kids to charter schools, to private schools, could be used for homeschooling materials if parents want to homeschool. And we've seen double-digit increase in private school enrollment, and homeschooling has doubled in the last 2 years. So, I want to give parents more of an option for education. And if you'll bear with me, one last thing about education is that vocational school opportunities, there's still a wait list. And I think we can do better as far as giving kids that vocational career path. The problem is, to me, that vocational schools tend to be linked, their funding is linked to the regional school district. And I'd like to uncouple that so that there is no, I want to make sure that the basic school district is okay with the money going off to a vocational school. Sometimes that money is $10,000 plus the additional $4,000 or $5,000 that the vocational school charges, for the kid to be there. And the regional school district has to make up that difference. So there's not an incentive to have the kid go to the vocational school. I'd like to make sure that that's decoupled so that there is only the consideration of what's good for that kid's future and where they want to go with their career that we look into. So those are just some of my initial thoughts on education. But again, it's something that's been important to me when I was a state representative for 8 years, and it's going to continue to be a main focus as governor.
So many issues to talk about, Mr. Deal, but so little time, unfortunately, especially on this primary night. Not at all. We appreciate your time and spending some time with us here at QATV to speak with our viewers. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Continuing on with our coverage of election 2022 primary day here in the state of Massachusetts and here at QATV. It is bring you the folks who are on the ballot as much as possible day, and one of those happens to be Norfolk County District Attorney Mike Morrissey of Quincy, stopping by to chat with us. And Mike, great to see you.
Yeah, still a few hours left, and gets us out of the rain, so I appreciate the opportunity to stop by.
Absolutely. The rain held off till Election Day, unfortunately.
It has, but I think they've had a good turnout. Over 400,000 people actually had voted by mail, and then I don't know that as many people, I haven't got the totals from my friend, the Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, but it was a little slower, I think, in the in-person early voting, but the mail-in voting seems to be very heavy.
I do want to ask, and I know prior to you asking your next question, Joe, how do you feel about the options that a voter has in Massachusetts?
Well, I guess we're down to the point where we've been whittling away some of the laws to make it as easy as it can for anybody to vote. And I mean, basically you'd be a couch potato and vote. So I get discouraged when I find out, like today, I know at 2 o'clock today, only about 14% of the city of Quincy had turned out to vote. And I guess if you win, you should be happy that no one turned out, that you're a winner. But I think the best thing to do is for more people to participate. And my brothers and sisters like to always say to their friends, listen, stop complaining unless you vote. And so, I mean, the voting mail-in system, we're obviously doing more to perfect it, but it's bar-coded, you can follow it, sign it, got to be safe, you make the rolls. I've not heard any complaints. It seems to be, unlike some states where they just mail you a ballot, or they mail you 3 ballots, you know what I mean? And if you're an unenrolled voter, they mail you a Green Party, a Democrat. No, they have to affirmatively take steps to do some of this stuff. And I think, that's Secretary Galvin kind of shepherded that, and it seems to be going well. It led to record turnouts 2 years ago, and more people during COVID. So, but people, I think, during COVID were kind of different type of focus, and they actually, I think, paid more attention to the election. Now, you can't help but watch TV. We have all the people from, I would say, Cow Hampshire. My brother wouldn't like that, but so you have the New Hampshire Airways now coming down, and plus all the people who are advertising here.
Well, what stays here, what's said here stays here.
Okay, yeah, sure. And to the other, 20,000 listeners. But
Mike, you've been in some form of government, politics for most of your adult life, really.
That's a pretty fair statement.
Yeah. What's your kind of current take on the political climate here in Massachusetts?
Well, I mean, I think, I look at it a little bit different than some of my other colleagues because the district attorney's office is a little bit more apolitical. I mean, you try to be fair to no matter, what the Democrat, Republican, or whatever. So it's not, I think, as probably strictly aligned one party or the other. It's all about being fairness and open. So I guess the perspective has changed a little. I don't know that, we had a record turnout 2 years ago, but I still get discouraged in the local and state elections that I bet that we'll be lucky to see 25% of the state turn out and vote, even with the options that we're giving people. It just, I look at it, there's no excuse not to vote these days. And I hope you vote for me, but if you didn't, if you sat home and didn't vote, I guess I have to agree with my brothers and sisters, don't complain. And the primaries are so important because they often determine, again, who's going to go to the final, and they're often the winner. And I would suspect that today, particularly on the Democratic side, where there's some difficult choices to be made, the Republicans have a fight for governor, and they don't have much down the ballot. They have some candidates for statewide office. But the real fights appear to be, there's a fight for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side, for auditor, for attorney general, for Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So those winners are probably going to be in a very good position to win in the final. And but polling is great, but the only poll that matters is today, and that's when you put an X or color in the little circle, and you vote. So I just hope people, if this gets on early before the time, I hope people still get out 8 o'clock, unless you live in Barnstable County. But we won't go there. My friend, the Secretary of State, had to step in and get a court order to extend voting till to midnight. And I know that we joke, and people have referred to him as the Prince of Darkness, and so they jokingly said, "Well, now you can call me Captain Midnight," because Barnstable County will have voting until midnight. But it's it's a tough job, that trying to make sure that everybody has access to vote, and he's done a great job. And I think we do a good job here in the city. Nicole and the clerk's office they certify papers, they're timely, they're attentive, they help anybody, it doesn't matter who or what you are. And we're very fortunate. That's not always the case across the Commonwealth, but there's 28 cities and towns, and one city and 27 towns in Norfolk County, although there are 2 towns who want to be cities, or act like cities.
Braintree and Weymouth, right?
Braintree and Weymouth, right. So, but it's, I'm glad to be running again. We've done a pretty good job focusing on what I consider preventable crimes, and that's opioid deaths. And I have help with here. Laura Martin and the city have spent a lot of resources, and we reduced our deaths from 3 a week to 2 a week. But that's still obviously too many people dying, and automobile accidents still an issue. We have 40 to 50 automobile deaths in Norfolk County, and motor vehicle homicides, many of them drug and alcohol related. And even during COVID, April after COVID hit us, we had more automobile deaths that month when no one was supposed to be driving than like the 2 Aprils before. But we have also reduced, for the state, automobile deaths have gone up, Norfolk County has gone down, and I think we have a lot of prevention, intervention, education programs and the community coalitions, and my hat's off to them, because I help build them and they help sustain them, and they do a wonderful job. And for catching up, we're still trying to shovel out from underneath some of the backlog of some of the serious cases we had. We didn't have the ability to have a 12-person jury for almost 18 months in the Superior Court, so we get a dozen murders a year. Anyway, 8 to 12 would be a decent amount, and not too many here in the city, fortunately. We have our share. And lately we've had a little bit more, I guess. But so some of the old ones that just tough to move forward and to get moving. We've had a lot of ties and closeness to develop with some of the victims' families, and want to get those cases moved along. So I'm happy that I hope to get that opportunity in November to continue to do that.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us, taking the opportunity, the invite to join us here this evening.
I was happy to get out of the rain, so even to talk to you two.
Ah, really? Well, that makes us feel so much better.
I thought so, yeah, because you haven't out in the rain. But,
we'll see you on November 8th. You're unopposed, so we'll see you on November 8th.
Yeah, well, we still need a vote. So, hopefully if you're listening, if it still comes up, and if you didn't vote for me this time, hopefully you will in November.
And we'll see you in November.
Okay, thanks a lot.
So more interviews came your way there from election 2020, the state primary. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Catalano. Joe, it's been a great evening.
Must be getting late, Mark, because you're 2 years behind 2022.
I said that.
Yes, we don't want to relive 2020 again, that's for sure.
2022.
But we do thank you. And we don't actually have numbers from Quincy City Hall to bring you just as of yet. We may, if we're still on the air and they come in, and bring them to you, of course, this evening. But if not, we do invite you to join us tomorrow morning, beginning at 7 a.m. on our AM Quincy program. We will certainly have the Quincy voting numbers for you at that time.
Speaking of joining us, we do have a candidate for re-election, State Representative Bruce Ayers. He represents the 1st Norfolk District. Representative Ayers, welcome.
Hey, Mark, Joe, it's nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation to come out tonight.
Thank you for accepting that. And I know you were out at the polls today because I saw all kinds of pictures of you getting wet.
Yeah, hats off to all the candidates who were out today. There was a lot of activity in Quincy. To all the people that came out to vote, the sign holders of all the candidates, it was just it was a tough day weather-wise, and the day after Labor Day is always kind of challenging to get people to focus. The kids aren't back in school yet. The parents have priorities. They're trying to juggle everything at once. Had a lot of variables, but it was great to see the people that come out.
I think most folks actually were happy to see the rain because we're in a drought, right?
That's
we
right.
do need the rain.
That's right. For the candidates, there's just so much time and effort that goes into any campaign. That's why I say, to everybody who put themselves on the ballot today, it can be a long summer, So when the weather doesn't cooperate, you do the best you can to get your vote out.
At least it was a warm rain, right? It wasn't cold.
It
wasn't
was
cold out there.
It was. It was unusually warm, like a Florida style. But you know, one thing I noticed is the great work that the clerk's office did. Nikki, Joe Newton, all the people behind the scenes that help out today, especially now with early voting, mail-in voting. So much extra work behind the scenes, you know, to help all the people, you know, whether it's seniors or veterans that, you know, may have had difficulty going out today. You know, they had the opportunity to mail in their vote. They could do early voting. So I think we saw some big numbers, 6, maybe 7,000 people that voted, that mailed in their vote, early voted combined.
Yep.
So I know some of those votes are still being tallied tonight, but what a big difference.
Where did you vote, Bruce?
Squantum School.
Okay.
My wife Maureen and I voted about 7:30 tonight. We went all around today to most of the precincts, the ones we could get to, but you know the poll workers they were hard at work.
And mention, if you could, the ride to the polls that you offer.
Yes, well, you know, we offer wheelchair accessible rides to the polls every primary and general election. But Mark, it was funny today. We thought we'd get a lot of people, but we didn't get one call.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow,
and
I'm
I think it might have been due to the mail-in voting.
Okay.
Or the early voting. Maybe some, you know, with the weather, but we'll be certainly offering that again in the general election in November. So if some of the folks would like to get a ride to the polls in a wheelchair accessible van, we have a van that's completely modified, has a ramp, has a wheelchair restraint system, you know, so we'll be happy to take you to your polling place.
First Norfolk District, Bruce, is what? What geographical area?
I have about 1/3 of Quincy, and I go out into Randolph. And if you're familiar with Randolph, if you're going down 28, everything on the left-hand side would be the First Norfolk District. Right-hand side being like Lombardo's and La Scala.
Okay.
That would be Representative Bill Driscoll's district.
Okay.
But a lot of activity by some of the statewide candidates today in Quincy.
Yes.
I know Kim Driscoll was there. Others were out and about. You know, they know Quincy's a hot spot.
Yes.
Squantum School especially.
No question, it's always one of the top vote getters in the city, yes, both in the municipal and state elections as
Yes,
well.
yes.
Masking candidates, Bruce, their thoughts on the prospect of having a Democratic governor again in Massachusetts?
Well, it's exciting. You know, we've certainly been through it before with Deval Patrick. But, you know, I think it aligns a lot of the policies that, you know, the House and the Senate are working on now, whether it's workforce development, mental health, post-COVID initiatives to get people back to work, schools, working with our seniors, our veterans, you know, a lot of the same bills, you know, that I think you're going to see the governor elect, you know, if it is a Democrat,
right.
You know, be working in collaboration.
Reflecting on the Baker-Polito years, what would you say?
Well, you know, I think it was, you know, the governor worked awful hard. He established a good working relationship over the years, something I admired him for, working with the House members and the Senate members, taking the time to get to know the representatives, to learn their districts, what some of their priorities were. Certainly in Quincy, with the relationship Mayor Koch had and the city councilors and school committee with his administration was certainly a big help. You know, a lot of the key things that we look for with the governor's office and the treasurer's office, things like the school building authority, where we can get money for our schools, Squantum School being next on docket. But, you know, these are all the types of initiatives that when we have an opportunity to talk to the governor or the treasurer or others, we try to set our goals and objectives for our districts and lobby for those. So I think it'll be exciting to see a Democrat, if it is a Democrat, in November to kind of line up a lot of those priorities.
Really appreciate you taking the opportunity to come by and say hi to us and chat with the voters.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Mark, as always, appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and good luck.
Thanks.
And if you're continuing to stay with us here at QATV, we certainly thank you for being a part of our election night coverage. We will have numbers when they come in. They will be reported on my colleague's morning show, AM Quincy.
Absolutely. Look forward to bringing those to you beginning at 7 a.m. on QATV and streaming live, by the way, on QATV.org as well. But great to be with you this evening as well, Mark.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you at home for watching. Thanks to our Executive Director, Jonathan Kaleri, and every other member of the staff, Christopher Potter, Michael Jarvie, Carol Themin, and Ryan McWade, who worked behind the scenes to bring you this coverage tonight.
For all of us here at Quincy Access Television, have a good evening.